have another horror, non-horror review. Another Terry Gilliam film. Been on kind of a Monty Python-esque kick lately. This is the Adventures of Baron Munchausen. And this is the third of three films that Terry Gilliam directed, loosely connected films under what's called a trilogy of imagination, which is centers around all the stages of life and a kind of a character study and a look at a person's evolution as a child, as a middle-aged person, and then this third film, old age. So you've got the first film, which I talked about, was Time Bandits, which is a fantasy film centered around childhood, and then you've got Brazil, which is kind of middle age and how life as a middle-aged person, you become somewhat disenchanted with the realities around you. And then this third film, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, this is old age, and as Terry Gilliam put it, it's really about his fears of getting old and trying to escape old age by living out fantasies and imagination. The film's based on a real person. Munchausen was a general, a military guy in the 1700s, and he fought against the Turks for the Russians. And then later, his stories were, for the lack of a better term, fantasized in novels and exaggerated significantly, basically to the point of lies, and a number of novels that, as it turns out, the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, or the Tales of Munchausen, was the second most famous and most read book next to the Bible up to, say, 1950, apparently. So there's a lot of background to this story, and it's a fun, fascinating movie. It's a series of set pieces, starting with the Baron essentially telling a group of people that have arrived at a stage play just before the Turks, or Ottoman Turks, are raiding this village, if you will. They're putting on a stage play, and the Baron is explaining how he held off the Turk invasion, and he's done all these wonderful different things, and the movie kind of plays through that fantasy of a very old man reliving his life in a fantasy sense. The movie was a financial disaster. It was ended up being budgeted. The spend on it was like $35 million, which is apparently open to debate. And the box office was only $8 million. And yet at the same time, I think in 1990, the film won numerous awards, like 4 Oscars for best special effects and best costumes, and et cetera, et cetera. And this film has gotten huge accolades from the critics. Well deserved. It's a really, really good movie, a very entertaining movie. But the story behind the movie, which is on this Blu-ray, by the way, there's a 71-minute behind-the-scenes story of Munchausen, and it's one of the best making-of documentaries I've ever seen, because it tells the story of this troubled production in a very equitable light. So what you've got the director, Terry Gilliam, which is kind of the brain trust, the visionary for this film. He's not the money guy, he's the guy that wants to put a vision onto a screen. Then you've got the money people, which is Columbia Pictures, and then Film Finance, which is apparently a group that it's kind of like insurance. They insure timely production of movies, and if the film goes over production, their insurance is kind of a backstop. and they step in the position of the studio when things don't go well. Then you've got the German producer Thomas Schuler, who his version of events. And all these people actually get somewhat equal representation on this documentary, which is great. So you've got Terry Gilliam explaining what happened. You've got the producer on his side of the equation explaining things. And you've even got Film Finance explaining their side of the events. But the bottom line is this wonderful film, for whatever reason, got crapped on, And the studio... The other element to this with Columbia was that they just had a changing of the guard of CEOs, and the new CEO, if the old CEOs said what time it was, the new CEO would have disagreed. So the new CEO didn't want anything to do with Terry Gilliam or the film. So it's the story of making of this film, this troubled production, is more interesting, in my opinion, than the film itself. So I highly recommend getting this, just if nothing else, just to learn about the ins and outs of the film industry and how these troubled productions go so far afield. It's just it was just sometimes things don't work out. I mean, it's something everyone wanted to cast blame on the director Terry Gilliam, that he was out of control and spent $40 million or whatever the number was. But, when you really break it down, somewhere between Terry Gilliam's story, the producer story, the finance Columbia story, somewhere there is the truth, and probably everyone has their share of blame, because the film, had it been managed properly, should have done better. I mean, it wasn't marketed well. It was the budget overruns were a result of a misguided attempt to shoot in Italy and Spain. So there was just a number of things, and then they just had a series of unfortunate events, weather-related events, that just delayed the production. But the movie is a wonderful movie, and the documentary is even better. So I highly recommend it, as is the Time Bandits in Brazil, which Brazil is probably the best of the three films. So if you like Monty Python, you probably will like any of these three films, and I would recommend getting it. So see you soon. Thanks.